Today we have our first speaker is Ambassador NADEEM RIYAZ. Ambassador NADEEM RIYAZ is the current president of the Institute of Regional Studies. He is a former diplomat who worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan from 1985 to 2020. Ambassador RIYAZ holds a master's degree in international relations from Columbia University, New York, USA, with regional specialization in South Asia. He also holds a master's degree in political science from Government College, Lahore, Pakistan. During the course of this long career with the Foreign Office, he has held many key positions at the headquarters, including Director Europe, Director Administration, Director Foreign Service Academy, Director in General China, and Additional Foreign Secretary Europe. His postings abroad include Second Secretary High Commissioner of Pakistan, Pretoria, South Africa, Embassy of Paris, France, and he served as ambassador to Sweden, Finland, Estonia, and Latvia from 2009 to 2013. He was Pakistan's ambassador to Italy from October 2015 to February 2020 and was concurrently accredited to Slovenia, Albania, and San Marino. Ambassador RIYAZ also served as permanent delegate to FAO, WFP, and IFED. He also served on the Standing Committee of International Development Law Organization, and Ambassador RIYAZ has been associated with teaching for over a decade. He was a regular guest speaker and lectured at various universities in Sweden, Finland, Italy, and Slovenia. He is also the author of Handbook for Diplomats of Pakistan. And now I give the mic to Ambassador NADEEM RIYAZ.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Nabila, for the kind introduction. Assalamu alaikum to all the participants. Like, I've been given 10 minutes and I have to basically, touch upon Afghanistan. Well, Afghanistan is a country which for the last 4 decades, what we know, have been in a perpetual state of crisis. Whether it was the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, whether it was the Soviet defeat, the rise of the Taliban, and first of all, you had the Mujahideen, then you had a period of a government of the Taliban, and then you had 9/11, and then the advent of the Americans and the NATO forces. And now with the US withdrawal, where does that leave Afghanistan? Afghanistan is still a country which remains in a perpetual crisis. Now that perpetual crisis, whatever it is, not only affects the people of Afghanistan, it not only affects the countries around Afghanistan, but it has an impact on the happenings in the world in one way or the other. Now, what has happened? Let's try to, synthesize things into bullet points. The Americans, after putting in over $2 trillion, being there for 20 years, have left the country. And you can debate it, is it in a better condition or is it a country which is far worse than what it was 20 years ago? Now, the Soviets also left Afghanistan, but once the Soviets left Afghanistan, they were able to have some sort of a government which lasted for a particular period of time. When the Americans have left, like, the Taliban virtually have taken over the country. And I don't think there was any analyst which could have predicted that the takeover of the Taliban of Afghanistan would be that swift. Like starting, somewhere towards the beginning of the last month, virtually by the 15th of last month, they were walking around in Kabul and they took over Kabul without using a single bullet. Now, what does that signify? That signifies that, there were a lot of miscalculations by the international community. And some of those miscalculations I would like to translate into a few points again. One, that there was too much of thinking that the Western brand of democracy was acceptable. That is the first thing. Secondly, the Afghan National Army could actually put up some resistance to the Taliban. The third was that the Battle of Kabul is going to be long and it's going to be a while before the Taliban would virtually take over Kabul. And then the last was that, Afghanistan, after the withdrawal of the US troops would break into a civil war situation. As we speak, all these projections have been proven wrong. The Afghan National Army could not put up any resistance. There are many reasons for that. We can go into that in the question answer session. Taliban virtually ran over the country within more or less 10 to 12 days. At present, there is no civil war in Afghanistan. Yes, there have been news of resistance in Panjshir, but there was a very categoric statement by the spokesperson of the Taliban that they have taken over Panjshir now, and yes, there was a resistance, and it is there. So that brings me to the question that which a lot of people ask, that are the Taliban the same Taliban which were there in the 90s, or have they been reformed? A lot of people like to use the word reform, which I do not like to use. I think the Taliban they have maneuvered themselves very well. They have, from the time of the Doha round of talks, they got the necessary recognition. They have been able to negotiate very well. And in addition to the negotiations, they have been able to launch a ground offensive, which was able to give them the necessary territories, and they were able to virtually take over Kabul. Now, saying all that, what does that mean? That means that there has been no resistance to the Taliban, either by the people of Afghanistan or by the Afghan national forces. Now, there can be many reasons for that. One could be that, when a machinery is working so well, people do not believe in the system which is in existence over there, which was a system which was an alien system, so they did not put up any resistance. That could be one explanation. The other explanation could be that, if you go by history, Afghans have never really have a liking for a system which has been imposed on them. History is full of those examples. Nobody has been able to successfully conquer Afghanistan. People have been able to conquer it, but not hold on to the power for a very long time. That could be another explanation. But regardless of all the explanations, now that the Taliban are in Kabul, what do we expect is going to happen? One, the Taliban have been able to, so far, very successfully address the three major international concerns about the new setup in Afghanistan, that it should be all-inclusive. It should be a setup which should give position to women and human rights. And Afghan soil should not be used for any terrorist activities for any other countries. Whatever happens in the future will only be projections. But since the day the Taliban have taken over till now, I don't think that they have said or done anything which can be construed as going against what the international expectations are from Afghanistan. Now, whether the Taliban will be able to form an inclusive government, well, again, you can always argue on the origins of the word inclusive. That what do you mean by inclusive? Your definition of inclusivism may not be the same definition of what may be held by the West regarding an inclusive process. But from what I at least understand is that it should be a broad-based government which should take into account all the other stakeholders in Afghanistan, and there are many stakeholders. To expect that any new setup which will be formed will cater for all the requirements and need of all the various groups which are present in Afghanistan, I think that will be a fallacy. But if a setup can include the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, the Hazaras, the Taliban, and some of the people who have been associated with the setup in the past, I think that could be termed as an inclusive government. Now, whether it will happen or not, that again remains to be seen. But at least all indications are that the Taliban will be able to form a government which will comprise uh, elements which represent a fairly broad-based setup in Afghanistan. Now, again, the concept of Western democracy, like I said in the beginning, is a bit alien to Afghanistan. To expect that the Taliban are going to form a government which will adhere to what there was previously under Ashraf Ghani, I think that's not going to happen. They are going to have a sort of a government which they have already basically also said in not many words, but it's going to be a government where there will be a Khunzada Hebatullah, who will be the supreme leader. Now, under that, they may be deputy supreme leaders. And I think a setup will include Mullah Brother and few of the top Taliban leaders. I guess the government would probably be something like a council of elders, which would start try to rule the country. I think the Taliban are very conscious about the international recognition, and I think that is something which it will always be in the back of their mind, and it is. So I don't think they are going to go and do something which is going to annoy the international community, at least not in the short run. Because I think that is what is really required in Afghanistan, that there should be a government which should get the process moving. They have not really elaborated on it, and I'm sure that in the next few days they will be having a setup. But then once they have a setup, the question which will arise will be the recognition. Now, if you go by the government of the Taliban in the past, they didn't get the international recognition. But I think presently the regional approach will be very essential. The Taliban have reached out to all the countries in the region, and if they follow what they have been saying from the day they have taken over, I think that the international recognition should come probably first from the region, and then maybe slowly but steadily from countries which are far away. I mean, I'm talking about Europe, I'm talking about the United States. Because you see, without any international recognition, the turmoil in Afghanistan will continue. Now, to expect that the regional countries will not play any role in the future of Afghanistan, I think that is also something which we must keep in mind, that all regional countries will have some sort of a role in Afghanistan, whether it is economic, whether it is like regarding support, training, facilitation, whatever, I mean, all countries will have a role. And like, whether it is China, whether it is Pakistan, whether it is Russia, whether it is Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and even India. So I think to expect that the regional countries will not have a role, that I think is something which is completely wrong. The regional countries will have a role to play. Afghanistan will have issues of governance. Afghanistan will have issues of food security. Afghanistan will have issues of recognition. But with the help of the regional countries and with international assistance, these are issues which can be, I won't say settled, but they can be conquered. Afghanistan will always have this issue of misperceptions because, if you look at the international media, there are so many challenges which are being thrown at the Taliban. They will be doing this, they will be doing that, but have they done it? Give them a chance. That is, I think, the most important thing. You can speculate, You can speculate, but like, those speculations have to be based on some facts. You cannot base your speculations on the past of a particular group of people. And likewise, I said that, all the regional countries will have issues. All the international community will have issues of security. They will have issues that Afghanistan soil should not be used against them by any of the organizations which are proscribed. I'm talking about organizations like TTP. I'm talking about organizations like ETIM. All these and regional countries do have serious concerns about all these. And the last point, which I would like to just briefly touch upon before I close, is the role of Pakistan. I mean, if you look at a large amount of news items which are appearing in the international media, like, Pakistan is being blamed. Like, I mean, please, for God's sake. I mean, if a mighty superpower with $2 trillion and all the sophisticated armaments and weaponry at its control and 20 years of stay in Afghanistan could not subjugate the Taliban and could not really have a system which could bring peace and prosperity, lasting peace and prosperity to Afghanistan. Please do not blame a neighboring country for your failures. If anybody is to be blamed for the failure in Afghanistan, it has to be the entire international community, which comprises of all countries. It doesn't. So signaling out one or two countries that they are responsible for the ills of Afghanistan, I think it is very, very illogical and ill-founded. So what does the future hold? I think for everyone, for the region, for the world, for us, the Afghan, whatever government the Afghans want, that should be allowed to be established, and that should be given some sort of a support so that there is peace and stability in Afghanistan. This is what the people of Afghanistan require. And any peace and stability in Afghanistan will bring peace and stability in the region. The region is facing multiple challenges of climate change, of poverty. These challenges can only be addressed by working together. I have not touched upon the possible scenario of a civil war. I have not touched upon on the refugee issue, because I am an optimist and I feel that in Afghanistan, a form of government will come which can, with support, bring about lasting stability and peace. Yes, we have to watch out for the food security, because if there are economic challenges, they are challenges of basic existence, yes, then they can be a refugee crisis. So I would like to stop here. And thank you very much for providing me the opportunity to speak. And I would like to answer any questions which the people participating in this may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for showing the real picture of Afghanistan, and also shedding light on the expectations, the apprehensions, and also the reality on the ground in Afghanistan. Our second speaker will be speaking on the challenges for Afghanistan. Dr. HUMA BAQAI is our second speaker. She is an associate professor of social sciences and liberal arts and former associate dean, Faculty of Business Administration, IBA Karachi. Her teaching and research experience spans over a period of 25 years. She is working with both national and international media as an international relations expert and political analyst since 1999, and has served both as a media analyst and as an anchor person in PTV for 10 plus years. followed by Channel 24 and News 1. She is also associated with Radio Pakistan and Voice of America as an analyst. Currently, Dr. BAQAI is a member of board of directors of more than 10 educational institutions and private and non-profit organizations. She is also a certified corporate trainer for the International Academy for Leadership, Gummerbach, Germany. She is a visiting faculty at Air War College, National Institute of Management, Karachi. She is a part of track 2 diplomacy between Pakistan and Afghanistan. With this brief introduction, I give the mic to Dr. HUMA BAQAI.
Thank you, Nabila. And if this was brief, I don't have a longer one. I think you covered everything. So very kind of you. I'm going to just pick up a thread from the introduction that you gave, where you said that I was a part of the track 2 diplomacy with Afghanistan, and I've been a part of that for the last 10 years. And yesterday, when the news flashed on the media that Fahim Dashti died or was killed during resistance in Panjshir, it had a very different connotation for me. And the different connotation was that I had sat down with Fahim in more than 10 consultations that happened both in Kabul and in Islamabad. So I know he was a part of a resistance, and in the interactions that we had, he also had a very biased view of what Pakistan had done in Afghanistan. And we would always sometimes humor him and at other times get annoyed by him. But hearing about his death hit me in a way that told me that war is a very, very tricky thing. And I think that should be the trigger of all our consultations on Afghanistan, because it is not this side or that side that wins or loses. It is people who suffer. And I think it is the suffering of the people of Afghanistan for the last 40 years now that should trigger the decisions of the international community, especially, and more so of the West. Because I think the plight that Afghanistan faces today is largely their doing, their strategic confusion, their lack of interest, their lack of intellectual insights into the reality of Afghanistan, their complete sort of distancing of what was really happening on the ground, and then being extremely, I'm going to use that word, being extremely selfish. Are Taliban the best option? Perhaps not. Exactly the same way when we say that democracy is not the best solution, but it is one of the most, it's one of the most acceptable and available options to the world today. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be without hiccups. But the fact remains that the Taliban are the new reality, the new political face of Afghanistan, put in place with the requisite facilitations by the very skeptical West, and largely the United States, and where now we have bipartisan consensus over the fact that this cut and run should have happened. They may couch this into very nice terms, like they always do, and try to control the narrative on how situation unfolds in Afghanistan. But the fact remains that they can't absolve themselves of the responsibility of what they've done to this piece of land and the people who live there. What happened in Vietnam pales in front of what is happening in Afghanistan. If US was humbled in Afghanistan, it stands humiliated in Afghanistan. And there is a desire to do a damage control there. In the backdrop of this, I would also like to point out that I don't think Afghanistan, its challenges, the way forward, how things are going to unfold there, can be viewed in isolation with what is happening in the region and what is happening between a superpower and an emerging superpower of the world. I think the rivalry between the United States of America and China, which US itself calls the biggest challenge, foreign policy challenge for the United States in the 21st century, is going to remain the backdrop of how the situation unfolds in Afghanistan. Having said this, I will also now probably talk about the challenges that were identified as a topic. Of course, the challenges are pretty obvious. The challenges are of governance, of economic sustainability, of handling the terrorist groups, of ISIS, and all that humanitarian crisis unfolding there, all of that. And the fact remains that, yes, Taliban are a warring entity, carrying on a resistance for 20 years was not so difficult, or if it was difficult, it was sustainable. They were able to do it. They kept the element of violence active on the ground, but being on the other side of the fence is not going to be easy. Being on the other side of the fence means delivering on tangibles. When you are resisting, even if you can do something once a week, you're able to keep the resistance alive. When you're governing, if you do one thing wrong, in 24 hours, you are held accountable, or it piles up. So yes, the situation is extremely critical for the Taliban. We constantly hear about the recognition by the international community or the diplomatic isolation that the Taliban may face. My humble submission to this very august gathering here is that I don't think Taliban are diplomatically isolated. It was their diplomatic engagement that allowed what we saw today. So a lot of missions may have shut down in Afghanistan. Engagement is 360 degrees. And there is another interesting dimension to it, which is of course a challenge, but it is also that the message that the Taliban are giving to the world. The message that the Taliban are giving to the world is that we will engage with those who engage with us on our terms. And in return for that, we can do a few things with which you can't do without. You can't do without engaging with the Taliban if you want your people out of Afghanistan. That is the first challenge for the Western community. And the Taliban have acted very smartly. They've not stopped one person from getting out of Afghanistan who wanted to get out. Yesterday, 4 Americans left Afghanistan on foot, were welcomed by American diplomats in Pakistan, in Islamabad. And the US now acknowledged that. It was widely reported in the US media, and a lot of think tanks said that it has moved forward, and now geography will determine the next steps that are being taken in Afghanistan. So I think there is no isolation, there's no diplomatic isolation, and every single capital of the world, including the Western capitals, are ready to engage with Afghanistan for lack of other options. Because whatever that they want to achieve in Afghanistan cannot be done, whether it is controlling the ISIS, whether it is human rights and women rights they have overnight become so concerned about, and any other dimension that you'd like to put on the table. And I'm not saying that these issues don't exist. Issues of human rights also exist, issues of women rights also exist. But intervention on the basis of human rights and women rights and rule of law and project democracy, I think the days for that is over for the United States. And that is the new global reality. And this has unfolded, or this has happened because what unfolded in Afghanistan in the last 3 weeks, especially. That was the showcasing of what had been going on for a long time. There is a lack of trust, there's suspicion, and the challenge for Taliban is to address that both internally and externally. Externally, they've given all the right messages, but once again, I would like to identify there's just one tough talk that has come from the Taliban. And the tough talk that came from Taliban was yesterday when they took over Panjshir, and they said that we have a very serious view of insurgents. And we will handle and tackle that very, very stringently. Now, this is also a message for the resistance inside Afghanistan, but the message is much louder for those who may choose to support this insurgency inside Afghanistan. The message is much louder for them. And if I may also add here, when the Panjshir resistance started, these people were in contact. Saleh was in contact with various capitals, more so of the peripheral sides, to get support. And it came to a point where they had no arms and they had no food. And the Panjshir situation ended the way it ended. I don't think that the resistance has died. It has become scattered, but I also know that I can connect the dots, and I can see that the Taliban have given this message to the international community that do not support the insurgency inside Afghanistan. And in return for that, they have told the international community, including the peripheral countries, that your concerns will be addressed, which tells me that they're acting in a very politically mature and savvy fashion. And they are very pointedly addressing the concerns of the international community and of course, the people of Afghanistan. The people of Afghanistan have lived with 40 years of uncertainty. If 20 years of US presence in Afghanistan was a recipe for peace, then it was a disaster because it did very little for the people of Afghanistan. 60% of them are still under the poverty line. They allowed a very corrupt, selfish elite to rule them. And then that elite literally abandoned them and left Afghanistan. So the US betted on the wrong horse. And that has come to the fore today. The third challenge that is constantly identified and is now being talked about is, of course, the financial challenge. The first thing the West did once they facilitated the Taliban to come into power is to choke their financial pipeline. So US blocked access to much needed 9.4 billion international reserves of Afghanistan government and US banks. The International Monetary Fund has also suspended 460 million in emergency reserves. The World Bank's action followed a similar decision by IMF and Biden administration to suspend more than 5.3 billion aid to Afghanistan. This is after they facilitate their coming to power in so many ways. They choose to engage with them to get their people out. I was told by the journalist on the ground that the soldiers to the Kabul airport were actually escorted by the Taliban. And Blinken is in Doha right now, categorically saying that we need to engage with them, which essentially means that either there is strategic confusion or this is being done by design to have some kind of chaos in Afghanistan and using this financial assistance as a leverage to control them. Once again, a mistake. The entity we call Taliban are difficult to control. They can be engaged because right now they are actively seeking engagement. But controlling them through coercion has not worked and it will not work now for various reasons. For one obvious reason, which is time tested, that when you impose sanctions and such kind of restrictions, the suffering is not of the ruling elite, it is of the people. You have done it in Iran, you've done it elsewhere. The governments remain intact, they don't get hurt by this. It is the people on the ground that get hurt by this. The humanitarian crisis unfolding is another dimension. Ambassador NADEEM talked about the food crisis. It is also now being referred to as the hunger crisis. At least 200 million is needed urgently to be able to continue to feed the most vulnerable Afghans. By the end of September, this is just around the corner, by the end of September, the stocks which the World Food Programme has in country will be out. Allowing this humanitarian crisis to unfold is inhuman. And it is the responsibility of the United Nations in the West to intervene, if nothing else for humanitarian reasons. And I also want to tell you that this is not going to change the situation because I'm going to quote an example here. If they choose not to do it. In Yemen, they attacked Saudi Arabia 2 days ago. And the UN, and this happened exactly when the new UN chief came there. The UN chief is in discussion with the Yemeni insurgents. Of course, the whole paradigm of being supported by Iran and all of that. But they said that we will allow aid to come in if you open the Sana'a airport. So the sufferings of the humans are sometimes become a bargaining chip for the ruling elite. And that is where pragmatism is needed to be exercised by those who claim to be the champions of human rights and human rights and whatever. There are people living in tents in Kabul. They can't go back to their homes because of the fight, very subtle fighting that did go on before the Taliban took over happened, and the assistance is required. So the first thing that the Taliban, I mean, we're all talking about inclusive government. I have a huge problem with this term. There's nothing which is called an inclusive government. And I was surprised that even American senators were using this term. What you can at best aim for is a broad-based government. And I think the broad-based government would be right now more in terms of optics than reality on the ground, and the international community will have to accept them. The major face, the main face of the government that is formed in Afghanistan will largely be the Taliban. There are two dasturs from which probably Taliban will build the governance model. One dastur is, of course, very, very conservative. And what is happening in Afghanistan right now is actually, you know, it's a clash between conservatism and modernity. That is, and both, there are extremes of the both. So the Taliban will constantly work to relate their ideological vision to the real-time political imperatives of inclusivity and diversity. Here I can use the term inclusivity. And they did a very practical, tangible example of it. You see, when 10th Ashura, the Shiite Imam bargahs were protected by the Taliban. The Taliban went inside the bargahs and spoke to those people. And the processions were allowed. This was just after the Taliban had taken over. And I think this was a very, very tangible example of how they were working towards diversity and inclusivity. And unfortunately, I don't hear about this in the Western media at all. Nobody brings it up. It is absolute cherry picking. So we've seen pictures that were of Syria and elsewhere showcased as atrocities committed by the Taliban, and none of what they're doing on the ground being showcased, where a women protest happened on the day that they were going to announce the government, and that women protest was allowed to happen, where the fourth day, Zan TV, which I was on that network when I was in Afghanistan, is entirely run by the women, went on air. Tolo went on air. A women journalist spoke to the spokesperson of the Afghan Taliban. None of that is either showcased nor talked about on the Western media. And if the Western media thinks that it is going to become a showcase of Western liberal model, I think they're mistaken. That's not going to happen. Because like I said, they are constantly doing this fusion of modernity and conservatism. And that is going to be the new face of Afghanistan. That has been the face of the Afghanistan. Every single woman during the 20 years when the Americans were there, and the 9 consultations that I had, women who wanted to be a part of the Afghan political setup covered their heads and dressed up conservatively. That is the reality of the Afghan government, even when the Americans were there, because they understood their cultural sensitivities. And it is for the Afghans to decide what is their dress code. And a women's dress code is not representative of women repression or oppression. We need to stop making it so superficial. And that is what we do with Afghanistan and other countries. It's not going to be the model of what West thinks is liberal, is acceptable, but Iran is not entirely acceptable to the Western world. Saudi Arabia is not acceptable, or whatever happens in Saudi Arabia at least 2-3 years ago, even now, is not entirely as per the Western construct of women's rights and human rights. And they're very, very comfortable with working with them. And then come to this largest democracy we called India. How extremely comfortable has been the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Bush administration. They've been very comfortable with all that Modi is doing, making them their strategic partners in South Asia to achieve their own political ends. Not a word about what's happening in Kashmir. It's genocide. Not a word what is happening to Dalits, not a word what is happening to the Muslims, not a word about what's happening to women. Delhi is the rape capital of the world. And our own country is not exactly the model of libertine constructs. We have patriarchy, we have selective use of religion and all of that, which is not acceptable to them. So they put us on a list now and then, but are very comfortable to work with them and engage with them, engage with us. I think the same model can be applied to Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is now actively seeking China as a strategic partner, as an economic partner, and China is smart. China is very smart. China was the first to offer the Taliban with the olive branch, and now they're dangling recognition and economic investment to them in return for what? In return for, of course, access to their trillion-dollar minerals, but also investing in there economically. But there's one thing very different that the Chinese are doing in Afghanistan, which perhaps other superpowers did not. And that is that they're not taking the responsibility of maintaining order in Afghanistan. They want the Taliban to maintain order, bring peace, and then they're ready to come in and play on the economic pitch. And if the Taliban work this out right, I think to a certain extent, they will be able to address their economic issues. And there are two other factors. Don't forget, Pathans by nature are traders. They will trade, formally or informally. Taliban did have a $6 billion churning amounts with them while they were carrying on with this resistance. Two, they are a sustenance force. They survive on very little. And more importantly, they are not corrupt. They're not financially corrupt. They will be able to deliver in far less. So I think Taliban are poised to meet a lot of challenges that are being identified. There are challenges of diplomatic isolation. Another challenge people identify is that of brain drain, which I think is also being overemphasized. Entire Afghanistan can't get up and leave. They are not forcefully asking people to stay. And if they maintain order, I'm not using the word peace right now. I think the first imperative, the first requirement for the Taliban is to bring order to the land. And once they bring order, all these high-sounding talks of democracy, electoral politics, so on and so forth can come forth. And coming back to something I missed out where I was talking about the dasturs that have been leaked. There's a 2020 dastur that has been leaked, which categorically says that they're not committed to electoral democracy. And I don't see electoral democracy coming to Afghanistan, at least immediately. And that is why they're smart. They're talking about an interim setup. Even functioning democracy sometimes needs interim setups to get over difficult patches. And that is what they're doing. Do you think Afghanistan is in a position where elections can be held tomorrow? Or even for that matter in 3 months or 6 months? You need a form of governance where you bring order, the life limps back to normal, there is some sanity. And for that, the international community should do hand-holding and mentoring. Because I think pushing them against the wall, doing the blame game, calling them out as barbarians and so on and so forth is self-defeating, counterproductive. It will not deliver. And I think Taliban are very conscious of the fact that this Afghanistan is not that of 20 years ago, the Afghanistan that was there 20 years ago, the one they took over. So they are ready for a fusion. They are ready for the accommodations that are required. And to make sure that they can govern, bring order in Afghanistan, they need to make those compromises and those accommodations. So yes, women will be allowed to go to universities, and there would be probably a strict code of dress. Isn't there a dress code for women in Iran? Isn't there a dress code for women in Saudi Arabia? Isn't there an unsaid dress code for women in Pakistan also? And don't talk about those 0.02% women that are called the so-called elite of Pakistan. I've taught at Karachi University for several years, for over 12 years. I know women who traveled through public transport had to adopt a certain dress code. And that remains the ground reality even today. So let's not just talk about things that sound nice. Look at what is the ground reality. And Afghanistan is not just Kabul, as much as the Western community would like us to think. They never went beyond Kabul. Even when they put Hamid Karzai in place, he was called the mayor of Kabul. I went to Afghanistan in 2019. That was my last visit. The country is, even Kabul was a city behind stone walls. Every single building in Afghanistan had stone walls to prevent an attack. It never had peace. It lived on the edge of peace at best. Will we allow Afghanistan to actually have some order and then eventually peace? And some people would, of course, come out and say that this is going to be the piece of the graveyard and so on and so forth. All of this sounds nice when you're not in the midst of the situation. When you have a humanitarian crisis unfolding, when things are bad, you don't know what is going to happen tomorrow, order is welcome. And Taliban are ready to give it to Afghanistan. And we must, not just we, I think the international community, especially the Western capitals, must engage with Afghanistan, give them their recognition also, and so that you remain engaged with them, so that you nudge them towards a civilized order eventually, instead of pushing them against the wall and making them a force which is beyond the construct of international law. I think that would be a huge blunder. Right now, they're actively seeking the international community. The international community should respond. Their challenges are immense. They have their own cadres, which it's an ideological force. They can't court-martial their people. They're not on a payroll. So they have to sort of control their own cadres, their own forces, and also create this element of trust inside Afghanistan, outside Afghanistan. Right now, they're doing all the right things. Let's cultivate them, let's mentor them, let's do some hand-holding so that even if they do things that are not immediately acceptable to us, we can nudge them to do otherwise, like we're doing, or the Western world is doing with several other capitals. Strangulating them financially, initiating allowing a humanitarian crisis to unfold in Afghanistan is going to become a challenge for the region and the international community. The challenges that we talk about Afghanistan are not Afghanistan's challenges alone. They're the challenges of the international community and the region. And I think that should be kept in mind before we make any decision about Afghanistan. And last but not least, you may not like Taliban, but you can't abandon Afghanistan and its people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. HUMA BAQAI, for very interesting insights. You actually analyzed the situation very aptly with credible arguments. And if I sum up your whole talk, it is like if the international community will, once again misunderstand the Afghanistan situation, and then one can question their honesty and one can question their civility. So now we will move to our, we are getting a lot of questions in the chat box, so we will be discussing the remaining aspects in the Q&A session. So now I move to our third speaker. Our third speaker is Dr. Rabia AKHTAR. Dr. AKHTAR is Director, Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research, University of Lahore. She is the founding director of the School of Integrated Social Sciences at University of Lahore. She holds a PhD in security studies from Kansas State University. She is a Fulbright alumna from 2010 to 2015. Dr. Akhtar received her master's degree in international relations from Qaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, and her master's in political science from Eastern Illinois University, USA. She has written extensively on South Asian nuclear security and deterrence dynamics. She is the author of a book titled The Blind Eye, US Non-Proliferation Policy Towards Pakistan from Ford to Clinton. Dr. Akhtar is also the editor of Pakistan Politico, Pakistan's first strategic and foreign affairs magazine. She is a member of Prime Minister's Advisory Council on Foreign Affairs. She is also a non-resident senior fellow at the South Asia Center, Atlantic Council, Washington, D.C. With this introduction, I give the mic to Dr. Rabia Akhtar.
Thank you so much, everybody. I had good morning in my greetings, but I have now shifted it to good afternoon. I thought everybody was going to speak for 10 minutes. So I'll be brief because there's a lot of overlap with Dr. BAQAI's and Ambassador NADEEM Riyaz's comments. But let me state at the outset that I'm not an Afghan expert, but yes, I do look at Pakistan's national security and foreign policy outlook and how it has been shaping for the past 4 decades. So brilliant remarks made by my fellow panelists. My first point is not so much a point of disagreement by looking at isolation from Dr. BAQAI, but it looks at it differently. I agree that there aren't any, the Taliban aren't yet diplomatically isolated, but their negotiation days are over that provided them that space with the international community, and they are now seen in a different light. Dr. BAQAI mentioned suspension of funds. It seems as if the isolation of Taliban by design post-Kabul takeover is an active strategy as some sort of face saving. I agree that that's a mistake. So you has a history of policies that centered around aid and sanctions, the carrots and sticks. And I don't think that Taliban are designed to absorb such coercive instruments. So if US does not learn, or the broader international community does not learn from the failures of these carrot sticks policies, then it would continue to stand as the loser and an outsider. Similarly, Google blocks their emails. Does Google think they are the only platform in this world? China, since it learned the hard way, developed its own versions of Google, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp. And it does very well, as you and I, who are consumers of Google and its products. China can provide the Taliban that alternative communications platform. And then the Google gods would even lose surveillance rights or intel that they would want to have over the new government leaders in Afghanistan once they form the government. So they should think twice about before they push Taliban to the wall. So if those who are negotiating with the US until the fall of the Kabul, and even afterwards to ensure safe evacuations, have suddenly become the terrorists of pre-9/11 and post-9/11 era, then you actually have drawn, again, a clear line of us versus them in your mind. And now you are putting a strategy in place to realize that us versus them. And going forward, I only see this divide widen. I agree that the Taliban don't have much to show for. They do not have a governance plan. They don't have an economic policy. They don't have an education policy. They don't have a health policy. They need to develop Afghanistan's national security strategy. They need to have law and order structure, policing, army. Everything needs to be formalized. They need to have a framework for working and functional and positive relations with its neighboring countries, so on and so forth. They need to get all the elements of a functional country in line, but that would happen in time. And Pakistan, its regional allies, and the broader international community needs to have patience. Let me make a statement about the people of Afghanistan and my limited interaction with them. There are 71 Afghan students in our School of International Relations studying IR degree at the BS level. They don't like the Taliban. Why? Because uncivilized barbarians that the West has portrayed them or as labeled them as, they do not want, as the generation who's only seen war, to be led by them, to be represented by them, right? And I get it. So, but what if the Taliban are convinced on democracy in years to come as a form of government, which I don't think is entirely an alien idea that cannot be adopted or be trained into? What if the Taliban learn as they engage with the international community for Afghanistan to have a chance to become a democratic republic? So if you block this learning now at this stage, if you block their evolution now and you refuse to engage and teach them, then you have lost all there could be for this next generation of Afghanis to rule Afghanistan one day as presidents or prime ministers. You have heard both Trump and Biden talk negatively about Ghani. That's not an afterthought. I understand where this generation is coming from and their love for Ghani, for being foreign educated, being able to communicate in English, being well-dressed and all that jazz. But I hope that they also saw Ghani fled and fled with their money. Why can't Afghanistan become a modern state under Sharia if that's the system they want under the Taliban? If they give fundamental human rights to their citizens, if they become a welfare state, if they respect the ethnic and religious minorities and accord them due rights, then who is the winner here? Dr. BAQAI has made a reference to Saudi Arabia. You would say the West works with Saudi Arabia because of their oil money. I'll say Afghanistan has precious minerals. And if they keep those under control, even as they extract them using external contractors, they should be good enough to sustain Afghan economy. They not need narco money then. So my question to the audience here and everybody who's looking at Afghanistan right now is, what if Taliban pull a surprise? They've already announced amnesty for all, which was not expected. They've already announced that all universities are open to women, which the world was not expecting. They will be announcing the government soon and would certainly need help with almost all the portfolios, because this is the first time that they'll be taking on formal roles. Ambassador RIYAZ has talked about international recognition, and I absolutely concur with him that recognition should be international and not only by regional allies if it comes to that. So recognition stands to be a huge challenge. So instead of engaging with the Taliban when they're reaching out, the world is doing what? Instead of the United Nations reaching out saying, let us tell you what the sustainable development goals are and why is it important for the world now that you are interacting with the world, what are they doing? They're evacuating women and girls out of Afghanistan, even when amnesty has been announced and opening of workplaces and universities has been announced by the Taliban. So I can understand some of it is because of Taliban's reputation, because of fear, because the new face that the Taliban are trying to pull is not reliable, and because of their previous reputation. But now that they're reaching out and saying that we want to work with you, we want to establish relations, we want to function like a government, there seems to be a confirmation bias with which the world is still operating, something which led to the chaos in the first place that we are witnessing and have been witnessing for the past 40 years. The way forward to me is engagement. The way forward is not isolating the Taliban at this point, making refugees out of Afghan people. US has spent $80 billion in training and equipping Afghan national forces. And once the ANDSF fell, those arms and ammunition were acquired by the Taliban. That was lack of foresight on US part, despite being told repeatedly by Pakistan over the years that this is not going to work in the long term. I would urge everybody to read Ijaz Haidar's article on the structural reasons as to why Afghan forces did not survive contact with the Taliban. This is similar to the surplus purchase of the Stinger missiles that the Mujahideen were left with after the retreat of the Soviet forces from Afghanistan. So the way forward is counterterrorism engagement with the Taliban to eliminate TTP, ISKP, and Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. For Pakistan going forward, one thing is absolutely clear: an emboldened TTP that has rejoiced over the victory of the Taliban is problematic. To my mind, there's just like no doubt about that. Pakistan's reading of Taliban's acceptability of TTP is absolutely critical. And in that regard, fencing of our border needs to stay and no compromise need to be made on it as we go forward. So I want to see a stable Afghanistan under the Taliban rule, like Dr. BAQAI said, because that's the only available choice right now. I want to see a stable Afghanistan where 3 million plus refugees that Pakistan has been hosting over several decades can go back to their homes and earn a decent living and live the life of dignity that they deserve. Therefore, a stable Afghanistan is in Pakistan's national interest, where it is relieved of the economic burden it has been facing of hosting Afghan refugees. We have some brilliant young Afghan students who are here with us in Pakistan, studying in various universities. I would want them to go back and join when a stable government is formed in Afghanistan. That's the future that I envision. So if we make stability a priority and we secure our borders until the TTP and allied terrorist forces that are anti-Pakistan are eliminated, we should have a framework to work with. So the bottom line, and my last point is that under the new government, when it is formed, integration, engagement, assimilation is the only way forward for broader stability in Afghanistan. Isolation and pushing the Taliban against the wall and using Afghanistan as proxy grounds for power parades is not the way forward. I thank you all and look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabia AKHTAR, for providing very insightful ideas for the way forward of Afghanistan, which are integration, engagement, and cooperation. Now we open up our question and answer session. I have received a lot of questions in the chat box. And the first question is directed to Ambassador NADEEM RIYAZ. It is from Syed Ali Zia Jafri from he's a research associate at Center for Security Strategy and Policy. He is asking, how do you look at the evolving ties with Tehran and the Taliban? How will China's rising economic stakes in the stability of both Iran and Afghanistan figure out in this equation, especially within the context of the BRI? Sir, this question is directed to you.
Thank you, Nabila. Nabila, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, the way I look at it is that, the economic relationship between Iran and Afghanistan will continue. The Taliban are a reality. They are there. And just like my other panelists said, whether you like them or you don't like them, that's altogether a different thing, but they are a reality. They remained there for 20 years. They put up the resistance, and now they are the people who are calling the shots. Iran and Afghanistan will have good relations. Those relationships will be strengthened. And I personally feel that despite all the sanctions which are on Iran, and right now, like, the funds which are not available to the Afghans, the natural trading between the two countries will continue and bilateral trade will increase. When you talk about China, China is a country which believes in making investments. China doesn't believe in the ideology of giving aid assistance. When there is peace and stability in Afghanistan, the Chinese are going to come in. They are going to put in the necessary funds. They have already said that. And that particular injection of capital into the Afghan economy will be beneficial for the Afghans as well as it will be beneficial for China. You see, whenever there is economic activity in any country, it gives employment to people. It improves the lot of the people as it reduces poverty. The last part of the question is related to the BRI. The BRI is a concept which the Chinese have. It's a concept, by the way, which also has support of some European countries. Logically, the CPAC, once Afghanistan is stable, in my opinion, can go through Afghanistan, and virtually then you can take the land route all the way to Europe. I think the economic activity has the necessary ingredients to bring about prosperity and to reduce poverty. So I think the Chinese will be interested, the Afghans will be interested, we would be interested, and all the other countries of the region will be interested, because it is for the benefit of all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now there is a second question for Dr. HUMA BAQAI. Ms. Adila Ahmed, she is a research fellow at Pakistan Institute of Conflict and Security Studies. She is asking, Taliban have so far proved more than being just a militant group. Then regional and international players will have to devise a new strategy to deal with them. But do you think that for regional and international players, one of the most serious challenge is ensuring that Afghanistan does not become a breeding ground for transnational terrorism?
Well, frankly speaking, what are your options? I keep asking this question at the risk of repeating myself. Your only option is to engage with the Taliban, whether you want to curtail ISIS, whether you want to curtail TTP, or any other spoiler that may be functioning in Afghanistan. You also know that because of the coming of Taliban, at least 80 plus outfits of India were shut down. So interestingly, a legitimate, recognized government allowed their land to be used against a neighboring country. Some even say facilitated it. On the other hand, Taliban have come in and given this categorical assurance to the international community and to all the peripheral countries, including China, including Pakistan, including Central Asian states, that we will not allow our land to be used against any other land. More importantly, you see, we would love to paint Taliban as a terrorist outfit. They are still in the designated list of the United Nations terrorist groups. It has not been removed from there. But having said this, they have achieved their target. They wanted the occupation of forces out of Afghanistan, and their end objective was Afghanistan. However, ISIS or many other groups functioning in Afghanistan, their end objective is not Afghanistan. In fact, now they've called Taliban the enemy, and they are looking at targets beyond Afghanistan. They're looking at the natural home for ISIS is the Middle East. That's where they will return. And the only option that the international community has is to work with the Taliban to control and counter them. And there were just some leaked documents of the Biden administration, which were reported in a newspaper day before yesterday, which categorically said that they are engaged with both Pakistan and the Taliban to make sure that terrorist outfits do not flourish and start functioning from Afghanistan. One. Two, there is also a serious rethink in United States to re-engage with Pakistan, because they do not want a nuclear power to go entirely into the Chinese camp. And they also want to have some leverage with Afghanistan, of which Pakistan is the face. There are two countries that have some leverage over Pakistan, over the Taliban, direct leverage for now. And it is just influence and not control. It's perhaps Qatar that facilitated them, and it is Pakistan. So I think let it be an exercise of compulsion, but you have to, out of sheer compulsion, and if you want to achieve your ends in Afghanistan, you have to engage with Pakistan, you have to engage with Qatar, and engage with the Taliban to make sure that this does not blow out of proportion. And that is why I said that the challenges that we say are Afghanistan's challenges, they are not Afghanistan's challenges. The challenges for the region and the challenges for global peace.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There is another question from Ms. Zunaira Inam. She is a research analyst at IRS. The Taliban's success as an insurgency rested on its ability to remain cohesive, but the group's challenge of maintaining cohesiveness across its many different factions of varied ideological intensity and material interests is tougher now, and it is in power. The most significant threat to the Taliban regime could come from within. Will the Taliban regime be able to maintain itself in the long term? Any of the panelists?
Taliban will continue to use fear as a strategy. They cannot let go of it. Exactly the way they continue to use violence till the last day as a bargaining chip. That is the honest truth of the matter. So if you think that fear will be subtracted from the equation, at least in the near future, I don't see that happening. They will engage, but they will also give a lot of leverage to their local leaders that they have engaged with to acquire this control. So there's this balance. Like I said in my presentation, there's this constant balance between the contemporary political imperatives and their ideological construct, a constant fusion of modernity and conservatism. But Taliban have to find a meeting ground. So I don't see that fear will completely go away. But I also see Taliban doing things which are out of the box. Like Rabia said, universities are open, girls are going back to school, women are being invited to come back to work. Yes, their dress code is being imposed. So that is the fusion. And that will continue to happen. Eventually, I hope that they can graduate politically to a point where they govern, the people who they govern own them and respect them and not fear them. But right now, I think fear is a reality of how things function in Afghanistan, also because of the baggage that exists.
Dr. Rabia, would you like to add something?
I think Dr. BAQAI has covered it comprehensively.
Okay. There is another question from Ashar Jamil Khan, Research Associate, Center for Security Strategy and Policy. This question is directed again to Dr. HUMA BAQAI. Given that TTP and Taliban had enjoyed intermittent relationship in the past, and probably the later still holds influence over the former, what likely impact would that have over future Pak-Afghan relations?
Well, I think Pak-Afghan relations are on a better footing. I am not pro the rejoicing that you saw on our TV channels, but I think that the relationship is on a slightly better footing. Pakistan still has to play its diplomatic cards very, very smartly. You have a propaganda machinery literally churning out anti-Pakistan sentiment in India and in Washington, which will continue to influence policymakers. But at the same time, I think Pakistan is able to make the Taliban at least say the right things about Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan, where they've said that they will not allow them to use their land. But just because this is a closed group and I'd like to put this on the table. So I had a conversation with a few journalists who visited Kabul. One of them has come back, and I think he spoke about it on the television also, so I'm very comfortable about saying it here. He said, when I spoke to the Taliban cadres, leadership, they categorically said, look, we had problems with the Americans, we worked it out. You have problems with Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan, you work it out. So like RIYAZ said, that we are engaging with them, we are supportive of the Taliban, we are facilitating them, but at the same time, we are also doing what we need to do. And one of them is not letting people come in without papers. That is a new. fencing the border at war footing to make sure that the fence was complete. 90% of it is complete before this situation unfolded. Had it not been so quick, would have completed 100% of it. And also constantly making the international community understand that we don't control them, but we are working with them. The same is true for Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan. We can't become complacent that because now that the Taliban are there, nothing will happen in Quetta and Balochistan. We've had an attack on Mustang the other day. People will find ways, spoilers will find ways to infiltrate Pakistan. Hybrid war is there, 5th generation war is there. So all I can say is that we need to be on our feet and we need to be alert. But we will continue to facilitate Afghanistan under the Taliban exactly the way that we worked with the Ghani government and Abdullah and Hamid Karzai. Abdullah was given a state welcome in Islamabad when these negotiations were initiated. So Pakistan is actually now committed to an Afghan-owned, Afghan-led peace process. And Taliban have surfaced as the indigenous option in Afghanistan. Thus, we will work with them, keeping our alerts there.
Okay, there is another
question. Answers your question. If you want a subsequent question, I'm very willing to answer that.
Okay, no, there is another question about India. This is a question from Ali Jafri. He's asking that Taliban has made its statement about India. So, there is a misplaced euphoria about India having been kicked out of Afghanistan. So the Taliban appear to be receptive to the idea of having solid ties with India. So what do you say about it?
Afghanistan is a sovereign country. We do not have a problem with India having ties with Afghanistan. Our problem is India using the strategic space that they had acquired for themselves under the Ghani government to use Afghanistan against Pakistan. That is Pakistan's sensitivity. Our sensitivity is not Afghanistan having ties with India. We don't have a problem with that. We have a problem of Afghan land being used against Pakistan, of which we have tangible proof. We've at least provided 2 dossiers to the United Nations. Very senior US leadership that has served in Afghanistan have acknowledged the fact that India is a spoiler there. 80 units have been shut down, like I said earlier. All of this is not thin air. These are hardcore facts. And with all honesty, in India, there is a debate going on. One debate is that we should have engaged Taliban earlier, because when they tried to engage the Taliban in Doha, the initiative was stonewalled. Another thing is that they've approached Russia to interact with, to engage with the Taliban, which also means that India is also now complacent, or understands that this is the new reality of Afghanistan. A former ambassador who had served, Indian diplomat who had served in Afghanistan, is on record saying that India must learn to work and live with the new reality in Afghanistan. So propaganda will go on, but there are serious questions being asked in India about their strategic convergence with Washington. And not just in India, by the way. Those questions are also being asked in the Gulf states. So what is at stake, or for the United States, post what has happened in Afghanistan, is their own credibility and their alliances and their partnerships. Because their own partners and alliances are now asking, allies are asking serious questions about that. The most vocal being the United Kingdom.
There is another question from Mr. Imran Sardar, who is a senior research analyst at the Institute of Regional Studies. Imran.
Thank you very much, Nabila. I just wanted to share some narratives that are building up in the Western media. So if you look at the United States, India, and the Western media, particularly after the fall of Kabul to the Taliban, we find extensive literature on rising militancy, Taliban, ISIS relations, Taliban, Al-Qaeda nexus, emerging security challenges to the world, and so on. This reveals that how Western media is manipulating the situation in Afghanistan to build up their own narratives. And these narratives, as everyone knows, that provide the basis for future interventions. So going through these recent trends, do you think the ground for new counter-terrorism strategy is being prepared?
Is that question directed to me?
Anyone can respond to this.
Okay, so my response would be slightly different from your direct question. And I think that for the last 3 years now, the American focus on terrorism as the sole objective, counterterrorism as a sole objective has dwindled. It's gone down on the rung of ladders. They now see China as the enemy. They see Russian-China nexus as a problem. So counterterrorism is now a side story, at least for the United States. And President Biden actually said so much in his speech. He said our enemies or people who are opposed to us would actually want to see us remain engaged in Afghanistan. The papers coming out of China are interesting because they are saying that US forever wars were a God-sent opportunity for China to become what China has become today. And it is not by default that you see that the toughest pushback that was initiated by Trump, but is now taking it's been taken to the new level, is by Biden, and it's on the economic front. So countering terrorism will remain on cards, but it is not the objective of at least US foreign policy. They have said that the biggest challenge for US foreign policy in the 21st century is the rise of China. And all their energies are directed there. And what we need to see is that how will this unfold? Will it be acute confrontation or competition or a crisscross of both? And US right now wants to do some cherry picking. So it wants to cooperate with China on climate change and perhaps on war on terror, but at the same time wants to give serious pushback to China on issues of global leadership. So I think, and China is now countering this pushback. There are two fronts where US has been defeated badly in the last 2 years. One is the management of COVID-19, and other is Afghanistan. COVID-19 brought Trump's presidency down. I don't know what Afghanistan will do to Biden's.
Okay, thank you. Any other panelist would like to answer to the same question? Okay. There is a, okay.
Yes, I would like to add something.
Okay.
Because in international relations, one thing is there, it's not just one strategy. Like, you know, your foreign policy or your national interest is the sum total of a number of objectives which you want to achieve by it. Yes, you know, there are what Dr. BAQAI said, there are various theories regarding it also that, like, you know, the Americans have left Afghanistan because, you know, they want to concentrate all their energies, their resources on the containment of China. But at the same time, in my opinion, the Americans in some way will want to remain engaged, whether they like it or not, with the Taliban, with the government in Kabul, because they do not want that all the efforts and the money which they sunk into this country, that tomorrow they may be the rise of another group, which will prove detrimental to their national security or to their interests. So as far as the counter-terrorism strategy is concerned, whether it is ours, whether it is of the Chinese, whether it is of the Americans or of the NATO countries, they will continue with that strategy, with a prong of that strategy, with Afghanistan also. That, in my opinion, would be the way. that policy will be conducted.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. There is a question for Dr. Rabia Akhtar. He's Ajmal Hajzada. He's a PAN student at University of Lahore. He's saying that Ma'am Rabia, you have mentioned that Afghan forces were incapable to fight Taliban, but he says that they fought for 20 years with Taliban, and in the end, when the US stepped back their support to the elected government in peace negotiations, so there was not any mean left to the Afghan forces to fight for. So, comment from you.
Sure, thank you, Ajmal, for this question. So I've referred you to read Ijaz Haidar's piece. I've shared a link as well, in which he refers back to the centralized nature of system, which had actually, with lopsided ethnic representation, which had informed the formation of ANDSF in the first place, which was problematic and which, according to him, and by his argument, led to the collapse of the forces itself. So that's like one point. If you read his piece, he's detailed it in quite a comprehensive manner, that the lack of discipline, poor chain of command, corruption in the officer cadre, especially in the higher ranks, and a civilian leadership with no experience of military operations, ensured this kind of failure, signs of which were not seen by anybody, especially the US. But if you were to look at past 20 years of their fighting, I think past 20 years was spent training them, equipping them with the military equipment, which was worth, in the entire training, that was worth more than $80 billion. But this was a 300,000 strong force, right? So you tell me, and if you have the voice right now, I would like the moderator to allow you to speak. 300,000 large force, how does it stop fighting once the US leaves the region, or once the US decides to evacuate? It just boggles my mind that just because they didn't have the US, they had the training, they had the weapons, what happened to the will to fight? So 300,000 strong force, how does it just give up and not fight the Taliban, which are nowhere close to the numbers that, ANDSF had? So I'd like to hear your viewpoint, because I think you're the only Afghani present here in this forum. So please do say a word, and I would request the moderator to allow that. So it is not only that US backed out and the force fell. There were structural reasons that were at fault, bringing this force together, which was not fit to fight any war. Had very minimal tactical gains, had no strategic vision or overview. So it was bound to fail. I wouldn't accord the entire failure to the US withdrawal. Thank you.
Mr. Muhammad Ajmal, do you want to respond?
Yes. Thank you, ma'am, for the chance. Ma'am, you have mentioned that the collapse, like I will particularly mention that, and we cannot decide, or we cannot mention a particular article and decide the fate of Afghanistan on that. So I will go particularly, there was some lack of management in the forces. There was some corruption in the forces. But if we see from other lenses, the Afghan forces fought for 20 years. Okay, if we you mentioned that they were on the training basis, like they were trained for that many years. But almost 2014, I think, the security, the Afghan forces have handled the security of Afghanistan for that. But when it comes to the sudden collapse, one of the major issues that I as an Afghan student living there and seeing my people and like when they share their thoughts on that, one of the major issues was that when the world abandoned Afghanistan and when the other countries do not support you when it really needs. So how can we were fighting for the world for last 20 years because that was the NATO forces were there, other countries were there. So we were fighting actually on their behalf as well, not only for a democratic Afghanistan, but we were fighting for the world as well. But when the world abandoned you in a major situation like the peace negotiation and not taking an elected government in confidence, so I don't think the mean for the fighting left there. So this is what I would like to say. Thank you.
Just one small remark. Thank you for your comments, and I really appreciate your perspective because you are from the system and the country, and you have an absolute stake in the future of Afghanistan. I believe that you are the future of Afghanistan, so you must be heard. The only problem that I have with militaries is that, where does your loyalty lie? I understand, being funded by a foreign occupation force, but once that foreign occupier is leaving the country, what is your prime responsibility? Is it not to safeguard the state for which you've been trained and given the weapons for? Why would you look up to the foreign forces, even if they're leaving? Why wouldn't you fight against those forces whom you think are detrimental for the security of your own country? If tomorrow something happens in Pakistan, I do not think that the Pakistan military is going to abandon the state of Pakistan. It would give its life and blood. That we didn't see, ANDSF do. So maybe there are other factors at play as well, which require a larger discussion. But thank you for your comments. I appreciate your viewpoint.
Thank you, Dr. Rabia. We are already ahead of time, so I'll take only two last questions and I'll club them together. There is a question from Ms. Humaira Iqbal. She is a senior research analyst at IRS. Thank you so much, panelists, for diverse and intellectual perspectives on the subject. She is asking that recently Indian ambassador to Doha held meeting with Taliban negotiator who assured Indian envoy of addressing their concerns. How do you look at this development? This question is directed to Dr. HUMA. And I would like to take another question from Arish Khan. He is also a senior research analyst at IRS. So then you can answer them. Arish.
Thank you, Nabila.
Harish, if you don't mind, let me answer this question and then I'll take yours. Okay, this is specifically, if I understood the question correctly, it was specifically on how the Indian envoy engaged with his Afghan counterpart or the Afghan leadership in Doha, and the response was not exactly stonewalling. And the response was that we will address your concerns. You see, the Taliban has also given a straight message to India, and not once, but several times, because of the nature of the relationship that existed before the Taliban took over. And that is that we do not have a problem with working with you unless two conditions are met. One is do not interfere into the internal affairs of Afghanistan. One. Two, our land is not available for use against any other state, more specifically Pakistan. So I think if India chooses to engage with the Taliban on their terms, neither Pakistan has a problem nor the Taliban have a problem. More importantly, I think India will engage with the Taliban. And this could have a ripple effect of improved relations on our eastern borders also, because the talks on Peshawar motorway, Peshawar-Kabul motorway are already underway. If this culminates into a reality, it makes India even less significant to the BRI and to the China-Pakistan economic corridor. There is already a talk of Afghan-Pakistan corridor, China-Afghan-Pakistan corridor. I think these connectivity initiatives should propel the countries, at least the regional countries, to come on board. China has always been very open to India coming on board. In fact, there was a time when the curtain raiser was happening on Belt Road Initiative, I think 3 years ago. The Chinese ambassador was in India, and he even offered changing the name of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor if India chose to come on board. This is a historical fact. So I think if India chooses to realign itself, rethink its revisit its foreign policy, this whole paradigm of the Asian century, will this Asian century truly be an Asian century and India can be a part of it, or it can be a Chinese century and India can continue with its convergence with Washington, compromising on its long-standing non-aligned status, so on and so forth. I think the choice is with India. Even Pakistan, despite the belligerence Modi government has been exhibiting, Pakistan has been open to a dialogue with India. Even despite all the situations that have happened. Of course, 5th August issue remains on the table, but the 5th August issue of Kashmir is even under question in the Indian Parliament. It's not just that we call it illegal. The Indian court, the Indian legal systems and constitutional, as per that, it is illegal. It is wrong. It is a backdoor entry. So Pakistan has always kept its doors open to dialogue, and Pakistan is completely comfortable with the Taliban having a decent relationship with India, provided Pakistan's sensitivities and sensibilities are taken into account.
Thank you. Now, Arish, please go ahead.
Thank you, Nabila. I have 2 questions. The first question is that the Taliban have been designated as a terrorist organization by the UNSC under UNSC resolutions 1267 and 1333. So how would that affect the recognition of the Taliban government in Afghanistan by any foreign government? That is question number 1. Question number 2 is about all the treaties that the previous Afghan government has entered into, the international treaties that the previous Afghan government has entered into, since we are talking about what next in Afghanistan. So I would like to have the panel's views on what would be the future of those treaties that the previous Afghan government has entered into. Thank you.
May I respond to this, or? All right, my response to designated terrorist organizations. I have a very skeptic view of designated terrorist organization. Nelson Mandela was a designated terrorist. Yes, and then he received the Nobel Peace Prize. Yasser Arafat and PLO were designated terrorist organizations. So really, a lot of it is politically motivated. And I think engagement is already there. I think Taliban are engaged with every important capital of the world as of now, when I speak to you. More of this engagement will happen. UN mandated sanctions or UN mandated terrorist status will impact less and less countries like China, who are actually looking at an alternative framework. And I also think that de facto recognition from China has already come. It has come from Pakistan, it has come from China, it has come from Qatar, it's come from Turkey, it's even come from UK. UK has categorically said we can't recognize them, but we can't afford not to engage with them. I think Germany is also working on the same lines. So I personally think that these statuses will change, but a lot of it will also depend on how the Taliban behave. The Taliban need to walk their talk. Taliban are working under what I call international searchlights. This is an era of citizen journalism and social media. They can't hide what they're doing in Afghanistan. It will get out and it will get publicized. They have a lot of negative baggage. So I think the Taliban should also play cautiously. And if they play cautiously and they play their cards right, eventually recognition will come. And about the treaties, I think once the recognition comes, it is upon Taliban to carry them forward or not, because even the United States of America is not ready to take forward Obama's treaties with China, Iran, and it chose to revisit them. So it is Afghanistan's national interest, as it is perceived by the Taliban, will determine the future of the treaties that the previous government has entered into.
Very briefly, Arish, answer to your question is that, when the Taliban were negotiating, they were still the designated terrorists, right? So the world was talking to them, the world is still talking to them, engaging with them. So while, yes, part of it is politically motivated, this is perhaps the only leverage that the international community has with on the US list or the UN list or whatever list. But like I said, I don't think Taliban would be intimidated by these titles. They are reaching out to the world. They want to engage. And yes, they need to put something on the table to show that they want a progressive, modern Afghanistan, even if it comes under those, they will give something, they will gain something. And going forward, I do believe if everything falls in place and, if they behave according to some of the expectations of the international community, but the international community also gives them some space, then I think it's a win-win for all, and you will see these titles wither away. They can negotiate with terrorists. If these terrorists could provide them a safe evacuation corridor, then anything can happen.
Yeah, I would I'd like to add to what Dr. HUMA has just said. These are just, well, to be very honest with you, these sanctions and all which are put and these tags, they are there, but when you are a reality, things are bound to change. I think that is the most important thing. You have to give things time. And please do realize that in international relations, any country is sovereign to take its decisions. I don't know why people look too much into it, that the Indian representative has met the Taliban, so-and-so has met so-and-so. They are sovereign. They will take decisions as per their own interests. For countries, for players, it is essential that you engage with them so that your own interests are protected. I think that is the most important thing. I don't think there is any country which would want to dictate terms to another country, because when you do that, that is what happens, and that is what you have seen has happened, not only in Afghanistan, what has happened in Syria, what has happened in Libya. When you try to dictate your own terms, people rebel. So the basic thing is that we have to keep our engagement with the Taliban, with Afghanistan, so that our national interests are protected and Afghan territory is not used against us by any of our detractors. Whatever relationship they have with the detractor is for them to decide. They are a sovereign entity. This is how international law and international relations operate.
Thank you so much, sir, for summing it up very well. I just want to thank all the eminent speakers for their in-depth analysis and very useful perspectives. Here I would like to just end the session. And thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay,
thank you. Khuda Hafiz.
Hafiz ji, pleasure being here. Take care.
Same here.